Welcome to this week's lecture. We're going to be talking about immigrant and refugee clients and women clients. So let's go ahead and get started. As of 2014, this is from your textbook, it's a little dated at this point, nearly 1 out of every 6 adults living in the U.S. was born abroad, so they weren't born here. So there are a lot of people who come to the U.S. For a variety of different reasons. People immigrate in order to escape poverty, in order to experience or achieve a higher quality of life. Immigrants and refugees, specifically refugees, will move because of some type of political unrest. There's all kinds of wars going on. You can look at the news and learn more information about that. And there might be, some type of like gang violence as well, so cartels. If people are, if there's a lack of safety in the region, or crimes are occurring, such as like crimes against humanity, that person or their family is at risk of being exploited or abused or kidnapped, then there's, people don't want to live that way. That I wouldn't think that that's a way to live, in which case, they'll try and find some other country to live in. I think it was about this time last year, I don't know if you guys saw the news, where there were 4 Americans who went down to Mexico and ended up getting kidnapped. And several of them, didn't survive. And that's just them visiting another country. So imagine that you're living in that part of the country, that state or that city where they were, and you're constantly at fear for your life of these individuals coming around and putting your life at risk, threatening your family. I think it's very normal for people to say, hey, where else in the world can I be where I will and my family will be safe and our lives won't be at risk? Immigrants have a lower rate of crime and are less likely to be behind bars. People complain about the fact that, immigrants or refugees are stealing jobs from Americans, but most of the time they're working jobs that Americans don't want to do anyways. Like, most of us probably don't want to be out in the field picking whatever fruit, or some type of, doing some type of field work or hard labor, or, picking up apples, or whatever it is. If you talk to most kids nowadays, they want to be influencers, which is not a plumbing job or electrician or some type of skill that's actually needed. In terms of stealing jobs, this idea also ignores the fact that immigrants and refugees, if they have a job here, they're paying, across the whole of all these individuals, billions of dollars in tax money, which goes to, help in terms of our Social Security, filling potholes in roads, any other public initiatives that better the community. And so, this idea that, oh, they're just going to come here and steal our jobs, it ignores a lot of other factors that are at play and a lot of benefits that we as a community or we as a society get from individuals coming here. Oftentimes, your textbook talks about this. Individuals who are coming here have an education or have some type of skill, and so they're really able to contribute to the community as opposed to adding additional strain on the community. Now, of course, there are certain situations or circumstances that are, going to be extensive or extenuating, such as the border crisis right now. That's putting a huge drain on different resources. But as those individuals are being able, once they're able to be processed through and find a home or find a place to live and start a job, now they're contributing to a society and doing jobs that a lot of us probably wouldn't want to do anyways. I personally have no desire to ever go become a plumber. In terms of working with this population, there are some things to know and pay attention to. Imagine that I don't know if any of you guys have ever traveled. We have traveled, not extensively, but a decent amount. And anytime you get to a new country, it can be, it can be a lot that's happening. The language isn't a language that if you're in like Japan or Vietnam or something like that, you don't recognize the language, you don't know the language. Now you're trying to navigate around, like, all right, well, what train do we need to take to get here? Or, what does this menu say? I can't read this. Obviously, there are a lot of technology services that can be helpful with that, but just place yourself in that person's shoes who's coming here. They don't know, a lot of times, maybe if they don't know the language, they don't know how to navigate our system. Maybe they don't know what information is available or out there, what services are out there. They might not know their rights. They might not know how to get a job, how to apply for a job, what our process looks like, because it's probably very different from whatever country that they're coming from. The best way to go about navigating healthcare or applying to schools. There's a lot that if you're coming here, especially if you're fleeing a country, and if you want to learn more information about this, there's all kinds of YouTube videos about people fleeing from the Ukraine war or from Gaza or any other country where there's a lot of conflict going on. And they talk about, getting here and it being very overwhelming. They've left family back home. There's kind of this culture shock that happens of like, I'm in a very different country and things are done very differently here. And I've left family and friends behind and I don't know if, maybe you don't know if they're okay or if they're going to survive. There, from a therapeutic standpoint, there's different values and different cultural expectations and factors at play. And so there's a lot to address and that can be addressed when working with this specific population. Individuals who, especially if they're refugees and they're going under certain or specific circumstances different than immigrants, right? Because immigrants, there might not be that stressful situation that's causing them to flee their home. There might be a lot of stress that's going on, a lot of worrying about maybe friends or family that maybe didn't make it out or are still in their country of origin. And depending on what's going on, sometimes maybe women are able to get a job more quickly or more easily, which then might change the dynamics of a family or the power relationship. And so there can potentially be, either based on the country and where people are coming from and differences of views, or how men are handle things, right? There are some countries where women are literally viewed as like livestock. And so there might be domestic violence occurring, or lethality that might be present that you need to assess for and make sure, are the children or are the women in this family unit safe, or do you need to create some type of safety plan in case there are domestic violence issues or concerns of homicide or that type of thing. So that is something to be considerate of and make sure that we're just being very thorough in an assessment when we're starting to work with a client, and make sure that we're kind of covering all the boxes there. We've talked quite a bit about how words are important and how we talk about different individuals or talk about different populations is important. So when you hear conversations about immigrants or refugees, whether that's from the news or media, or if this topic is discussed at home, what types of words or phrases are used in conjunction with this conversation? There's this prejudice and this discrimination of there's these waves of refugees, or these criminals are crossing our borders, or our borders aren't secure because of these criminals, or there's these sponges off the welfare system, and they're just going to come here and take all our resources and take all of our benefits, and so I think it's really important to pay attention to what is the terminology and the words that are being used around when we discuss this population. In terms of barriers to seeking treatment, of course, there's several things to pay attention to there. If there's a language barrier, it might be helpful to, maybe work with some type of interpreter. And when we talk about interpreters, it's important to make sure that that person specifically, is good or has experience translating medical jargon and language or psychological jargon and language, because that's, most people can maybe be an interpreter, but there's a lot of vernacular and verbiage, vocabulary within maybe more specifically a medical setting that might be difficult for them to interpret if they're not used to specifically practicing some of that terminology. Of course, cultural factors are important to pay attention to, and that's going to vary differently, of course, depending on what country the person is coming from. So there's that communication piece, that linguistic piece. Individuals who are coming here, of course, might not feel comfortable seeking mental health treatment and services, especially if there's a stigma associated with it from their family or their country of origin, or, depending on where people are coming from. Things maybe have changed. It's 2024, but historically, like, people might not even know, like, oh, I can go see a psychologist. Like, if that's not something that people do in their home country, it might not even be something that, crosses their mind or that they think of. So just making sure that if you're running into people or as you're starting to advertise for your practice, that you're, kind of getting those resources out there so that people know and are aware. Kind of going back to this idea of, prejudice and discrimination, and that people are, just draining our system. I'm going to get on a soapbox here for a minute. So, how many of us, because of our lineage, are from the US? Like, yes, you might have been born here, but realistically, almost none of us are actually from here, right? Christopher Columbus is credited with discovering the US in 1492. So to say we don't want people here personally, I think to me it's hypocritical, because it's almost saying, well, I myself don't want to be here. Like, who was here originally? American Indians were here. So at some point, your great 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 grandparents or parents, at some point those individuals immigrated here for whatever reason, whether they were an immigrant or a refugee. But those people weren't here originally, right? Unless you're an American Indian. We all moved here at some point, or our family at some point moved here. So would you go back in time to whatever point in time that your family moved here and say, oh, you shouldn't be here, you're going to be a drain on the system? Like, you probably wouldn't say that, because your family, whoever they were at that point in time, came here seeking either refuge or came here seeking to improve their quality of life. And so, I don't know, to me it's just, it's kind of ridiculous to say, like, oh, go back to your country. Like, well, one, their country clearly isn't safe for them to go back to, or it doesn't have enough economic benefit for them to be there in the first place, which is why they're coming here. And so, it's this kind of very Brene Brown idea of, how do we not live from a mindset of, that there's not enough? How do we take this approach and view it as there is enough resources for everybody? And so how do we help those individuals who are coming here often under very negative life circumstances, fleeing a war or running away from, a lack of safety, and say, all right, how do we support you, and how do we get you up on your feet? How do we help you help yourself? Kind of the idea of, if you teach a man to fish, he'll be able to feed himself. So helping them get into school if they need education, or helping them get a job so that they are able to become, a member of our community that is benefiting the overall community. So yeah, anyways, that's me and my little soapbox. Individuals, if they're here, there's a lot of refugees coming. There's a lot of people here, with the southern border crisis. There's a lot of people coming here and crossing the border. People might fear registering their kids for schools or seeking services such as medical aid, for fear of being deported or for fear of being caught. So you could see how this could become a very real kind of downward cycle if you're not getting the education that you need, or if you're not getting the medical care that you need. How are you going to be able to improve your life? How are you going to be able to get a good job and be able to make good money if you're not able to access those resources that you maybe need to be able to access? All right, moving on. So I don't want us to get hung up on the numbers here, because the picture doesn't say when this was actually created. I don't know how old these numbers are. But I do like this graph, because I think it shows a very real example of differences in what you could make over the course of your lifetime. If you have a high school diploma versus if you have some type of advanced degree, such as a master's or a doctorate. And so, this picture or this infograph probably also doesn't account for inflation. So again, I would take the numbers here with a grain of salt, but you get the idea in terms of the higher your level of education, the more money that you're going to make over the course of your working years. And if you want to pull up an example of this, you can, type into a search engine something like money made, based on what degree you have. Now imagine that you don't have the ability to go to college because you're not here legally, or imagine that you're a little kid and your parents are afraid to put you in school. There's a really great example in the textbook of someone whose dad came here from an African country as a diplomat, and then, due to circumstances that happen. Um, the kid's parents divorced. It's in the textbook, and his dad goes back to Africa, and that actually leads him and his family to being here illegally, because they were basically here because his dad was here for work, but his dad went back to Africa. Um, and so now, what are his options if he's now here suddenly, unexpectedly, illegally? I guess for whatever circumstances, the family chose not to go back to Africa and chose to stay here. There are actually, and I think this is amazing, as of the time that the textbook was written, there are 18 states that allow in-state tuition for immigrants and refugees. 5 states, including New Mexico, allow undocumented students to receive state financial aid, which I think that's amazing, because again, you're enabling someone to become a productive member of society by going and getting an education, and then more than likely pursuing that education into a career field where they're able to, now they're paying taxes, now they have a job where they're being a productive member of a society, as opposed to, potentially going in a different direction in life that could end up maybe potentially being very negative, just because realistically we all need money to live, right? And so if you can't get money um, through a positive means, such as having a job, you're more than likely at some point going to start trying to find money through unpositive ways, such as, drugs, or selling drugs, or whatever the case may be. Which is me making a very, very broad generalization there. Or maybe that's an assumption or bias in my own brain. So, anyways, I just want to cover this and highlight how important education is, because it has a very tangible financial benefit to it. I just wanted to, again, stats. I don't know that getting wrapped up in numbers is always necessarily beneficial, but just to kind of create some level of how much of a huge impact this is. There's 110 million people that are displaced. And so I wanted to kind of, and in a couple slides, I break it down based on, kind of looking at specific countries, but there are so many countries out there that have so much going on in terms of people needing to flee the country for whatever reason. And so I wanted to just kind of give a 30,000 foot bird's eye view of just how many people are impacted. And that puts, there's kind of this idea of like, oh, well, that strains the environment, or that strains whatever country that people are going to, and there's this idea of like, well, it's going to be a strain on the American country, us here in America. Well, it's going to strain every country, right? Because 110 million people who need somewhere to go. I don't know what the number is in terms of people who are in refugee camps or might try and stay in their country and just move to somewhere else in their country. But whether people are fleeing to Poland or France or the UK or Ireland or America or Canada, or wherever these people are going, all of those systems are having to identify ways to rise to the occasion and support these individuals and help get them the connections and the resources that they need. And so that's whether that's a lot of non-for-profits helping out, or whether that's, there's a lot of, I really fell down a rabbit hole with this. There's a lot of families in those countries, like families in Ireland, families in Austin, Texas, families in Green Bay, Wisconsin, who are literally people taking families into their home and saying, you can live with us for as long as needed. We're here to support you. What do you need? Which is really amazing to see humanity, kind of come forth and say, hey, we will support. What do you need? You can live with us. Here's a room. Here's our house. We open our doors to you. And so again, this idea of like, oh, is it placing a strain? Maybe, right? And you can see that in news articles, New York, Chicago, these bigger cities that are having all of these people bust in, and they're like, what do we do with these people? And at the same time, right? So there's always kind of this balance. And at the same time, there are people who are opening their doors and saying, we will help. We will, house people. We have an extra bedroom, or, we have a room over our garage. We can help support people. So that's pretty cool to see. Okay, so in terms of specifically working with clients, there are some things to consider, and I've kind of already talked about a couple things. Working to develop trust and build rapport is imperative. And so instead of jumping straight to like, what are your issues? What's your problem? Are you dealing with depression, anxiety? You might want to start with just like, tell me a little bit about yourself. What kinds of things do you do for fun? How do you relax? What are your hobbies? What is it that you miss about your country? To start to build that relationship with them and then go from there, but depending on what the person's needs are. I've kind of already touched on this, but there might be survivor's guilt if family members were killed, or friends were killed. There will maybe be grieving as people, grieve through whoever was lost or whoever didn't make it. And so helping the client work through that loss, and move through that can be hugely important. Getting an understanding of what their life might look like or is going to look like as they come to America and they process through that, because there are, of course, a lot of differences coming to America if you've lived or you were raised or you grew up somewhere else. That kind of culture shock piece, I talked about that already. Listening to their story, that's kind of what I'm saying with, starting out with getting to know them as opposed to jumping straight to, all right, you're depressed or you're anxious, let's fix that. Um, Clients that are coming from other countries have a lot of strengths, right? They're very resilient oftentimes because they've survived a lot of, depending on where they're coming from and the circumstances, a lot of traumatic events to get here. Um, there's often a strong sense of loyalty. There's often a strong work ethic, and there's that resilience piece, as well as depending on where they're coming from or where their family is or who they're here with. There's also that social support system that, can be very beneficial to fall back on and explore. All right, how can your family continue to support you? And that was in some of the YouTube videos as well of, maybe a woman and her kid came here, but then her husband is still, maybe back in Ukraine. And so they'll video time or FaceTime every day, very regularly, very consistently to maintain that social bond. So yeah, anyways, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. You might have picked up on a sense of that, but there's a lot of different YouTube videos out there, to really help us who, maybe I've for sure have never gone through any type of, been an immigrant, been a refugee. And so to help me understand what other people are going through, YouTube videos and that type of thing can really help, paint a picture for what that looks like, not just reading the textbook. A couple other strengths, and I found this really interesting, is that because refugees or immigrants have been through so much and they have kind of that resilience, they can make really strong entrepreneurs, especially if they come with some type of education background. And so there's actually, I found this really interesting. I was looking into different organizations that basically, companies that basically vet investment opportunities to provide funding to refugees for entrepreneurial endeavors, starting a business or a restaurant or that type of thing. And if you're interested in learning more about this, if you type in maybe just, exploring what volunteer options are in your area or how to support, immigrants or refugees in your area, you can type refugees, your city, Las Cruces or, Clovis, etc., and kind of see what's going on. And I actually found out that there is a refugee who opened up a restaurant 30 minutes from us. So I will be going to check that out in the next couple of days. So that's pretty cool. So there's a lot that's going on if you just kind of, type into a search engine this is what I'm looking for, and see what's happening in your area or what nonprofits are, working in your area to be able to, support individuals who might need services. So in terms of, the U.S. has, moved out of Afghanistan. It's been a couple years now. But very similar to other populations that we've seen, there can be a lot that's going on in terms of that culture shock, in terms of, that population specifically might not have any real background or exposure to working with therapists. And so that can be a challenge if people just aren't sure how to use therapy or what the benefits of therapy can be. Most of us probably are familiar with or saw videos of people trying to get onto airplanes. There was the guy who was like holding on to the wheel of the airplane until he like fell from the sky. And so there's some very real trauma that happened in terms of people being threatened with death or trying to get away because they didn't want to be tortured or injured or fear death from kind of the extremist groups that are there. Fear of family being left behind, I've kind of talked about that. Being separated from family or friends. There is, potentially from a therapist standpoint, working with clients who have experienced a loss of culture, this loss of identity, because now they're in a whole new culture. They're probably going through culture shock, and now they're trying to figure out, well, who am I now that I've had to, I've lost everything. Like some people literally got out of the country with the clothes on their back, and so they're coming here with nothing. They've lost everything. And so how do they kind of retain their identity or retain who they are or start to build a new life now that they're, here in the US or wherever they kind of ended up at? I've kind of already talked about that grief piece. There can be a lot of symptoms that are going on. It's a high level of stress, very stressful situation to go through. And so helping, them navigate a completely new system, like how do you get a bank account set up? How do you get your kids enrolled in school? And again, this has been going on for a couple of years now. There's Afghanistan, there was Ukraine. And so a lot of non-for-profits in different cities out there might have kind of gotten a lot of this down pat in terms of here's step one, here's step two, here's how you open a bank account, and kind of really gotten that process down to a T in terms of kind of helping people get all of those different things set up. And I saw that in a couple of the YouTube videos where like family members or a mom and her daughter would like get to a new country, and within like a week the kids were back in school. So really kind of getting that process down to a T, as I said. And then here's an example done at the end of the slide about people who, someone who was very, very real, re-experiencing or still kind of experiencing some of that trauma in terms of nightmares, and thinking back to family that, she misses the taste of fruit or neighbors, and that type of thing. So it is a very tough time for people to go through, for sure. And then there was a ton of different videos, and I was like, all right, how do I pick one specifically? Because there's so many videos. So I picked this one, but specifically, and it's a really short, because there's obviously there's lots of content out there. But this one specifically discusses that childcare, English classes, and jobs are three of the things that are most needed. And so, whether that's maybe finding a volunteer opportunity or maybe teaching an English class or whatever it is, there's lots of different ways to help out and to provide support if that's something that you are interested in. All right, so now we're going to switch gears and talk about working with women clients. And so what are some challenges that you think that women might face? Well, let's start with the definition of feminism. So feminism efforts are directed towards gender equality, equal rights, and opportunities for women. But feminism kind of gets this bad rap as like, oh, you're trying to take men down, or oh, all you care about is like women being the priority. It's like, no, it's more about wanting equality for everybody. And so how do we get to that level of equality, not specifically wanting one gender or the other gender to rule them all or that type of thing. There's definitely advocacy piece to this. So advocating for reproductive rights, ending wage differences. And I think I've talked about that in a previous lecture. That's something that I'm like pretty, I'll get pretty animated about, or kind of on my soapbox. Like, I'm a woman, obviously I don't want wage differences to occur, right? Because then I'm literally making less money than a male counterpart who works the exact same job and puts in the exact same amount of effort. Microaggressions, the glass ceiling being, this idea that you can only get so far in a career or in a job opportunity. Ending gender oppression, ending traditional gender roles. So there's lots of different, as I said, there's lots of different gender advocacy options and opportunities out there. women are at high risk for sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, intimate partner violence, and being victims of other forms of violence. Being harassed for unwanted attention, like walking down the street and a guy whistles at you and says like, "Hey girl, how you doing?" That type of thing. And personally, when I'll say when I was maybe in my 20s, I found that really flattering. Like, oh, someone thinks I'm cute. And now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, that's annoying. Like, I don't want your attention. I don't want you whistling at me or catcalling me. Like, I'm married. I go take your attention and go somewhere else. And I think part of that is that I have changed a lot since I was in my 20s, obviously. I've gained more confidence in myself. I've become more accepting of myself and who I am, and become more authentic to just being true to myself instead of trying to fit into like society's view or who society wants me to be. But that is something that women deal with much more is, kind of this almost harassment of, maybe men catcalling or giving you attention that you don't actually want. So something to think about, and specifically for teachers, or if you've got small kids, paying attention to how they might be being treated in school. And there's been research that's been done that compares how teachers treat, there's this research article where teachers were told these are the gifted children and these are the not gifted children. Or research that talks about like, here are the boys, they're really smart, here are the girls, they're not so smart. And so maybe teachers, due to their own biases or lack of assumptions, may treat girls versus boys very differently in the classroom, right? Might say something like, hey Johnny, you're really good at math, keep doing that. And then might say something to, I don't know, Jane, like, hey Jane, you're not so good at math, maybe don't go for a math degree or a math career. Kids are really smart. They pick up on those types of things. And so, unsurprisingly, women continue to be unrepresented in different STEM career fields, math, science, that type of thing. One study found that female engineer students who interacted with men behaving in a sexist manner prior to taking a test performed more poorly than women who were exposed to a non-sexist male prior to a test. And so to me, that's fascinating. And it highlights that, especially if we're busy going through our day, we're not really thinking about things. That's something that, something that can occur, such as someone maybe being a little sexist to you, can completely throw off your test results. Is something to try and like, all right, how do I increase my awareness around how environmental factors might be impacting me or my performance on something like a test? We've kind of already talked about, there's the gender gap in terms of wages. Shame, women reported experiencing shame as a web of different layers. So there's this aspect of competing, there's this aspect of conflict expectations. And so there can be a lot that is going on there in terms of driving shame, women being expected to try and be perfect, to act perfect, to take care of everyone, to try and do it all, which can cause a lot of maybe shame or guilt if you let one ball fall, or you're not able to kind of keep everything juggling or keep everything going. If you work full time and you have kids and you have to get the kids to all of their different sports practice or soccer or whatever, that can be a lot to manage. In terms of interventions for women, this often focuses on empowerment, identifying personal strengths, discovering areas of personal growth outside of those traditional roles. And then strengths, women, again, as similar to other populations we've seen, tend to have a lot of resilience. They tend to be able to somehow manage a lot and still kind of keep everything afloat. Women tend to be very smart, tend to be very resilient, as I've already mentioned, and have this ability to, no matter what they're faced with, kind of continue to take life's challenges and rise to the occasion. I didn't talk about this in terms of the video. So this is a video from Big Bang Theory. And it's like 4.5 minutes long. And it talks about, they're like, oh, we're going to go out and have fun. And then it kind of just ends up being how they're each faced, and they each talk about this different society pressures. And it's done really well, actually, because they're all, they're all going out to plan to have like a girls' night out, but they come at it from very different life points. Since Bernadette, they have a kid, they're married, one of them is not married, and then one of them is married, but they haven't had kids yet. And so they talk about this just kind of from different expectations of where they're at in life. So I think it's a really interesting scene. In terms of advocacy, so I wanted to throw this in there. If you're not familiar with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it might be worth typing her name into like YouTube and exploring all of the amazing work that she did, because she did so much in terms of advocating for women and being involved in different court cases and legal cases that benefited women and advocated for women's rights. Sadly, she has now passed away, but I wanted to throw this in there just because of how much amazing work she did. So I really like this. It's a short video from Barbie. And I like it because I think the actor, she kind of goes on this rant for a minute. And she does a really good job of, again, just kind of exploring some of these societal expectations. So she talks about these kind of contradictory expectations in terms of always be nice, but not too nice. Always be a boss, but not bossy. And so I think it does a really good job of highlighting how women have to kind of walk this tightrope of, being feminine, but not too feminine, being feminine, but not, being masculine and feminine, but not too much of boy or too much of one or the other. Like, if you're too girly or too feminine, that's an issue. But if you're, just one of the guys and hanging out, that's, too much of it. So, no, I like this. So I wanted to throw this in here. While we're talking about this, though, I want to also discuss societal expectations, because there can be a lot that goes on there as well. So there's, this aspect of beauty and beauty standards, and you want to be too thin, but not too thin. If you're fat or if you're chubby, like that's an issue. You don't, there's this idea that we as women have to look a certain way, right? Like have this Coke body going on. Like you've got to have the big butt and the big boobs. But if you've got fat anywhere else, like God forbid that. You want your face to look a certain way or your hair to look a certain way. There's this socialized aspect of prioritizing the needs of others, right? As a woman, you're supposed to take care of your kids first or take care of your husband first, or, you're filling this role of the nurturer and the caregiver, as opposed to, and that's part of something that I've worked with women on in therapy, is like, how do you take care of your kids? Yes, your kids need to be taken care of, but you also need to be taken care of, right? Like, you also need to engage in self-care. Or how do you relax? How do you decompress? How do you make sure that it's not 100% all about the kids, because that's probably also about the kids or your husband, or because it's probably also not healthy if you're not also prioritizing or taking care of yourself, right? At some point you're basically going to burn out, and then you're just going to be exhausted and tired all the time. And there are probably some of you who are moms, or some of you who know moms, or some of you who just know women who are women, not necessarily moms, probably feel that kind of burned out, like I'm burning the candle at both ends of the stick, and it just doesn't feel like I can ever catch up or ever be enough. Societal messaging, I've kind of already talked about this distorted expectation, which can lead to a lot of negative self-statements. And I've had more than one woman in my office wondering why she's feeling overwhelmed, or, feeling like, why can't I ever catch up, or why does it feel like I'm, never good enough, or, have all of this stuff going on. And part of that as a therapist is just normalizing that process for women. Like, well, you work 50 to 60 hours, and after that you spend another 20 to 30 hours either in childcare or housework, and so very much normalizing, like, yeah, any normal person who's got as much as you have on their plate would be tired, or would be exhausted, or would be feeling overwhelmed. And so, yeah, helping women specifically normalize and navigate that can be a helpful part of therapy. So this might be really hard to see, but I wanted to add it in here because it's apparently a 1950s home economics book extract of what to look for in a husband. And so if you can read it, it's, the little blurb here under each title is really funny. So it's stuff like have dinner ready, prepare yourself like 15 minutes before your husband gets home. Make sure that you've kind of, like rested and relaxed so that you're ready when he walks through the door. Make sure that the house is clean. Make sure that, and it kind of ends with like the goal on the last column there is like, make sure that your home is, this place of serenity so that your husband can come find peace both in mind and body and spirit and stuff. And it's like, wow, this is very different, I think, from 1950s to 1924. And so yeah, I thought this was interesting, so I wanted to throw this out here. But I do think that some of this is still, especially again depending on cultural factors, where you were raised or who raised you, there still very much is this these expectations to, maybe be the perfect housewife or to provide for your husband, and to put his needs first, as opposed to maybe having a little bit more of that feminist, balanced, equal for all. So yeah, wanted to add this in here. I really like this because so a graphic designer edited this to show what they thought it should look like. So you can see on the left, girl's life, it's all about like, have your dream hair, wake up pretty, say bye to drama, here's fall fashion tips. And then basically on the right, there's this juxtaposition of like, here's what I think it should really look like if we were, prioritizing not what society thinks is important, but what is actually so important, like, how to make sure that you're staying healthy, how to make sure that you're doing the best you can in school or in your community, how do you follow your dreams and what's important to you. And so there's definitely this, and this is just one example. But if you look at, whatever, if you're standing in the checkout line and you're looking at magazines, or if you're looking at YouTube thumbnails, so much of it is just kind of like this clickbaity, like what's going to get your attention so that you pick up the magazine or so that you click on the YouTube video. And it's all about this kind of sensationalized, trying to be a certain way and trying to be what society thinks that you should be. Instead of, who do you want to be? What's important to you? Disregard what society thinks or how they think you should be, and just try and be authentic to yourself. Be who you are, be what's important to you, as opposed to, what society wants you to be. So I really like this juxtaposition, this comparison of the two. I'd be interested in hearing what you guys think about this. So, all right. Lastly, and then we'll get to the discussion post. This video is actually funny. So there's a lot of research apparently being done on inequality, and they compared these two monkeys. And watch the video; it's worth watching. It's like 2.5 minutes. One of these monkeys is very unhappy about the inequality or perceived inequality that's happening. So here are the discussion post questions. Let me know if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you. Have a great week.